Welcome to Getting Transforms in C++. So in this video, we'll be introducing fvector, which is a data type that stores a vector, 3 points in space, x, y, and z. We'll be mixing dot and the other operator in order to access methods. We'll be using multiple format operators in a single line, and finally finishing our position report component off. By the end of the video, you will be able to run your code and see something like this. Your chair is at this position, and the rock is at this position, which will match what it says in the Details tab. So let's dive in and see how it's done. So welcome back. Let's look at how we're going to do this. We're going to want another string. So I'm going to make the outline of this code for you, and then I'm going to ask you to actually fill it in. So we're going to have an f string, and I'm going to call it something like object pos. And then I'm just going to call it x equals something for now. Y equals something else, etc. Okay? It doesn't matter. This is going to be replaced by some code that you're going to write in a little bit. Great. So I've made an f string. I have assigned it like that. Now, I want to show you something else. I'm just going to switch this around a little bit. %s is going to be the object name, is at, and then we're going to have another format operator, %s. And the way this works is it then goes and has a look for the second thing that matches the correct type. Now, of course, this is this dereferenced object pos just because of the way that this text macro works. It wants this star tchar thing, which we have to get to by dereferencing the string. So we just have to deal with these complexities for now. I think that the details of exactly what all this means and pointers and references will become clear in context as we go through the course. I don't think I want to give you a massive primer on pointers, etc. right now, because it's just not necessary in order to use this stuff and make some progress. So what I'm doing here is relatively simple. I've added another line with exactly the same pattern as a line above, but I put a string literal in there. And then I'm just adding a second format operator and a second thing on the end. Let's just build, make sure this works. And then I've got a little challenge for you, of course. So we run the game, and it says smchair is x something, y something, etc. This is the type of output I'm going to want you to achieve from the end of the challenge. But of course, instead of x something, y something, etc., I'm going to want it to actually point out the position that you would see if you were to click on either of your objects, and then go into the Details tab, and then have a look at Transform Location. And it's all in centimeters. You can see this position of the chair and the rock vary in my case. So I want that coming out on the console. Okay, that's going to be the end of the challenge. Let me show you the challenge specifically. So I want you to explore the API using dot and /. Just before I carry on, let me explain what I mean by this, just for the real beginners. So what I'm saying to you is, instead of my string literal, I'll get you started. I want you to say get owner dot something or that something, and I want you to go through using, where appropriate, this operator when it's a pointer, like actor star, and when it isn't a pointer, I want you to just use the dot. And I want you to go through exploring the API using those two operators. See if you can get the object's location, x, y, z.
Now, if you're using a newer version of Unreal than Ben, and you have the include what you use changes, you won't be able to use this methodology of using Visual Studio's IntelliSense to help you navigate the API. You're going to have to use the documentation. And the same goes for people who are using Xcode. You don't have the same level of IntelliSense as Visual Studios, and so you need to go and do it via the documentation. In either case, basically with newer versions of Visual Studios, it's the same problem because the header files aren't included, so Visual Studios doesn't know what methods are available for a given class. So if we go and do getOwner like Ben was doing, we're going to get our squiggly line underneath, and the IntelliSense won't work because if you have a look at it, it's saying that well, in this case, it's not giving me this error, but in other cases, you will see that it gives you the error that we've seen in the previous lecture, that a actor is not defined. And we know how to go and find the header for that. And I want to now show you that using that same approach, you can also discover the API even better than using IntelliSense. So if we go over to the documentation, and how do you find the documentation? Well, you go to the unrealengine.com, resources, documentation. That's another way of finding it. You can just Google for things like A-actor. And then you can search for a topic, like I want to search for A-actor. And I go ahead and do that. And then you see a couple of things come up. The first one we want is, let's see, the C++ API. If we click over into the C++ API, then we can find the A actor in here. And then what you've got here is the documentation, which is basically a list of everything that you would have had in IntelliSense, but better laid out with comments from the authors as well. So you can go ahead and look for things like location and search for places where you might be able to do things, get locations, and so on. There's quite a few places. Actor is a big class, but you can go ahead and find things. And if you want to then go a step further, so you've got a location from an actor, then you might want to go and do something with that location or something like that. Then you can have a look at the return type, which is in this column here. And you can see what's available on that return type as well. And remembering what Ben was saying about dots and arrows, you need to use them when one is an arrow when it's a pointer and dots when it's not a pointer. So you can go ahead and have an investigate of the API using this method instead.
Run and see if it prints on the output log. Now, I've got a hint for you, 3 hints actually, so if you don't want the hints, then just pause the video now, otherwise I'm going to give you 3 hints, especially if you're on Xcode. It's harder on Xcode because the completion isn't fuzzy. What that means is if you type the word transform, for instance, then it's not going to come up. You're going to have to start right, and the way to start right is with get, the word get. These things are getters. So for both the transform and the location, when you're looking for the right method, start with the word get. And the second hint is you'll need to use .toString. Otherwise, what you end up with won't be a string at the end. So see if you can get all that put together in the right order and actually get this location logging to the console. And if you manage it, share your victory in the discussions. Cool, welcome back. So let's take a look at the logic of this. So putting myself in your shoes, what are we looking for? So firstly, we have getOwner. We hover over it. We can see that it's a pointer to an actor, actor star. Therefore, we need this operator. Okay, cool. Now, let's see if we can find something like the transform. What have we got? Get transform. That sounds good. So it's a method because it says get. Hover over it, see what it says. What does this return? This returns something called an F transform. Okay, but it's not a pointer to an F transform. So we go dot now to see what's there. Now, let's go find out at this stage what an F transform is. Google for F transform Unreal. F transform there. And it'll tell you what it is, okay? What is this thing? It looks like it's a struct that contains 3 different things here, a rotation, a translation, and a scale, okay? So it is the translation that we're going to want to get off this. Let's continue exploring in Visual Studio. So dot. Now, trans, what have we got? Transform position. That sounds pretty good. If you're not sure what you're looking for, go back to Unreal and have a look in here. What have we got? Transform location. Okay, well, they're interchangeably using the word location and position, but it sounds pretty close to me. I think we want to try that. So dot, you could try location, get transform, get location, or do we want to go position? Transform position. Tricky. Which one are you going to lose and why? Well, let's try get location, see what comes back. Hover over it. It's a method. What does it return? An F vector. Well, that should work. An F vector, we're going to need to go toString because we can't just put a vector straight into this guy. So let's try that. See if get location works. At this point, yes, you could go look at the manual and see for get location, or if you're not sure which of these alternatives is going to work, it would be easy enough in a small project like this to build, test, and see if it gives you what you want. Let's build, run.
Okay, so let's see if we can repeat the process that Ben went through using the documentation instead. So we've got our A actor documentation. Now, you could have been looking for position or location. In Ben's case, he was looking for something called a transform instead. There's a few places that you can go and look for this. Don't always go with the first result. They're not really ordered by relevance. So do go and have a look at all of the results first. And here you go. We've got the get transform that he found. You may also have found get actor transform and thought that that's a good option. It probably is also a good option. Okay, so we can go ahead and do an arrow, get transform like so. Now what happens next? We know that the return type for get transform is an F transform. Now it's an F transform, not an F transform star, so we use the dot like Ben did, and we can go ahead and have a look at the documentation for the F transform. So there you go, we'll do a dot. And it tells us about the F transform, as Ben's documentation looks a little bit different, but it is basically telling us the same stuff. And we can go ahead and look for position among here. And again, remembering that the first option is not necessarily the right option, we want to go ahead and we can see there's the transform position that Ben came across, and so on and so forth. That's not particularly helpful. Maybe there's a location. There we go, get location. That's a useful one. Let's go ahead and use get location. So it's going to be dot transform dot get location dot, and then we can click on the F vector. Again, it was a dot because F vector didn't have a star after it. So then we've got our F vector, and we can go and have a look and see if there's any way to convert it to a string. There's a few things. To compact string, for example, that might be a different option for you to try out if you want to. And then finally, there's what Ben used, which was the toString. So we can do a dot toString semicolon. At this point, we can go ahead and compile. And if there are any errors about us not having included anything or an incomplete type, you know how to resolve that from the last video. You need to go ahead and have a look at what header file at the bottom of the documentation. If we go and scroll all the way down, what header file you may need to include. Now, at this point, we may not need to include anything because it might already all have been included for us. So we'll just wait and see if there are any errors. And in this case, there aren't, which is great. So I'll hand you back over to Ben.
Oh, that's looking pretty peachy. The chair, and I want to check these as well, so I'm going to pause, look at the chair, or just stop and look at the chair. It says that the chair is at minus 90, minus 210, 20. Very nice. And it says that the rock was at minus 230, 270, 40. Okay, well, it should be right. It's simple code. But this is a breakthrough because we now have inside C++ code, we've mixed these different accessor operators depending on whether we're dealing like the owner is an actor star, so we use this operator. But the transform returns an actual transform value, F transform, so we use the dot. The same with location, F vector, so we use a dot. And then toString, because we need the result of all of the rest of this to be turned into a string so that we can put it into object post, and then object post gets looked for here. So this %s looks for object name, this %edge s looks for object post. Big deep breath, guys. Good job. We have really made a good bit of headway into Unreal flavored C++. We can really start to grab hold of details of the world using our code. And now we'll move on and see some other juicy aspects of Unreal C++.